So, Jared, I know you're a big real estate guy. You love real estate.
Love it.
A lot of questions we get from our practice owners is around real estate. And, there's pros and cons to both sides, whether you should own your practice building or not. So let's take a little bit of time and just kind of unpack that topic. And I thought what we could do is you could kind of start with a lease. When might it make sense to lease as a practice owner?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the real estate is a big component of the dental practice. But if you think about it, I mean, when to lease, I'd say one is I guess if you're starting out, right, and you don't know how big you're going to be, right, it'd be kind of stink, if you will, to jump out and do a startup with five ops. Let's just say 4 or 5 ops. Start small, and you want to grow that thing into a 10-op practice.
Yeah.
Right? That doesn't make sense to buy at the beginning. So it probably makes sense to lease, right at the beginning. Another reason probably to lease is, usually, I wouldn't say all the time, but usually, you buy a building, they're going to make you put something down. There might be a lot of flexibility there with lenders, but that's a lot of cash sometimes, right? So that's got higher upfront costs in regard to buying. So leasing a property, right at the beginning probably makes more sense. Those are just a couple of the big ones. I'm trying to think through. There's another pro, I guess, with leasing is, you're not taking on the maintenance responsibilities a lot of times, which is less riskier, right? By not having to take those on, because you got big like HVAC units and stuff that go out. It's like, man, that's a chunk of change.
Yeah.
Try to pass that off to the landlord if you can. So that's probably, some pros to leasing. The downside, if you think about it, like the cons are probably the opposite of a lot of what I just said. Cons to leasing is you are just taking that money, that monthly rent payment that's going to that landlord, and it's gone.
Right.
Meaning it's gone from the fact that there's no equity that you're building up if you did have that, piece of real estate. So that's probably one of the biggest downsides. And another downside, I guess, another con to leasing would be typically most lease agreements you get into are going to have escalating rents, right? So maybe you lock it in with a 5-year lease at X amount per square foot, and you got 2 5-year options or whatever that looks like. That's going to go up with inflation, right? If you get a smart landlord,
right?
And you're just going to always pay more and more rent, which could be the flip side. While buying that piece of property. So just a couple maybe that come to mind on pros, cons to the leasing side. What would you say? Let's flip the script here. And a lot of what I said, you probably can say the opposite here.
Sure.
But, buying, why buy, right? Why buy that real estate that you're operating in?
Yeah, I think as a general rule, you and I probably are both of the same mind that we do like our practice owners to own their location. It is an asset. Like you said, you're building up equity. The caveat is if you have an asset that is not suitable for your growth goals, then you could potentially sell that asset, maybe do a tax-free exchange into another asset. But at the same time, that's not a guarantee. So sometimes when you're starting out, you may want to lease a while to get kind of the you feel for where you're going to be as a practice owner, and maybe that second step might be the practice, but or actually owning the building. Let's say that you're looking at buying an established practice. Generally speaking, the doctors who are selling will be open to the idea of selling their building, and I think most people should at least take a hard look at that option. We'll start with you have an asset, you're building up your personal net worth. You're building equity in something that's an asset that can be sold later on, but it also can generate cash. It opens up opportunities for tax plays. I know there's a whole nother podcast we could do on the self-rental rules, or a video we could do, but at the end of the day, generally speaking, you're going to get more bang for your buck when you actually own your building than you would leasing. So I think that's certainly something that makes sense. If you do have a desire to build out a bigger location, then you could potentially get income streams from third parties too. Now, that could probably be a con too, is that when you are your own landlord, so to speak. You are a landlord, and the things that a landlord in a lease building would take care of, you have to take care of those. So it's a little bit of more administrative burden. There's a little bit more coordination. If you have a bigger building with third parties, you got to take care of them. You want them to be happy. You want them to stick around. So that's more work too. So I've seen it where people buy these big complexes to have multiple third parties, and it is a pretty decent chunk of time that you have to spend to it. So, generally speaking, I think for most practice owners, I would say as a general rule, it probably does make sense to take a hard look, and if the financing and if the terms and the purchase price is right, yeah, take a look at that building, because I think the pros generally outweigh the cons, again, assuming it's a location that's suitable for where you see yourself being in 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I've had this conversation with 2 clients in the last week to 10 days, give or take, on, do I buy or not? Like, what do I do? And this was the thought process I went through with them, and jump in here if you're like, well, maybe this question here, and the question I went to immediately was, how long do you see yourself being here?
Yeah.
Right? Are you going to jump in here so you can expand a little bit, and then you're going to have to jump ship and go to another one? Right? So how long do you see yourself being here? And then one of the clients was it had another rental income potential component.
Yeah.
Meaning they weren't going to be the sole tenant, the dental practice of that piece of real estate. There was going to be another tenant in there, but it wasn't in there yet. Right? They would have to find that tenant, which is a little risky.
Yeah.
Right? So that's kind of the questions we went through of, well, and then the location. You hinted at this a little, didn't hint on, you talked about it, but I mean, the dental practice location is key. Go back to real estate, right? Location is everything. I think that's the same thing with the dental practice too. You got to have that visibility. People need to get to you, have easy access, parking, that sort of thing. So is it going to be a really good piece of real estate from a market value potential and the ability to kind of generate new patients and that sort of thing?
Yeah, and that's exactly right. When we talk to our great clients, they always kind of circle back on that, because we kind of tend to forget, right, that in our business, it doesn't really matter. We're more of a destination, but when it comes to dentistry, you want to have a good location that can pull people in and has good visibility and has good parking.
Yeah.
And has a auxiliary to that comment. Sometimes that means that the cost of acquisition, in other words, the land, is probably going to be a little bit more expensive if it's a build. Or if it's an existing building, it's probably going to be a little bit more expensive.
Right.
So to get good visibility, sometimes that may have to be a lease, and eventually you can try to find a location that has that same, suitable visibility, parking, so on and so forth. But generally speaking, I think you can expect that it probably would be more expensive. Medical type, locations tend to be more expensive than, say, warehouses, right?
Yep.
So that's just part of the equation. But the beautiful thing about numbers is that math can true out whether it makes sense or not, right? I mean, that's kind of what you have to do, is take a look at what's the ROI on it.
100%. Put pencil to paper. I mean, just go through this video again, but put pencil to paper on the pros and cons of each. Say, hey, this is going to be an estimated fixed monthly payment on buying. This is going to be a monthly payment on leasing that could increase. Your buying is going to increase as well with property taxes and insurance, but hopefully that principal and interest component stays fixed. And just, same conversation I have with the client. What's the upside?
Yep.
What's the downside? And can you live with that downside? And then just make that decision on your side. But I would recommend just kind of replay this video, go through those pros and cons. This sounds self-serving, but it's not. Get with your CPA.
Sure.
Because we glossed over the tax component.
Yeah. Whole nother video.
It's a big component.
Yes.
It's a big component to it that put pencil to paper definitely changes those numbers comparing the two up.
100%.
Yeah. So get with your CPA, look at that. But big decision. Almost the second probably biggest decision on, do I buy a practice? Do I buy the real estate?
Right.
Right. So look at it just in that vein, and weigh the pros and cons and make the right decision on your side.
You got it.
I love it, man. Appreciate it.
You bet.
See ya.